This is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday, 10 a.m, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, leave that Google review. And if you're watching on social media, get involved in the comments. The email address for any correspondence is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you'd like to get us on the move, you can get a podcast version, an audio podcast version every week from the platforms over on the other side of the screen. And we're live on Dulce Radio every day of the week, of course, as well. So let's say hello to our property expert and indeed a new government as we say hello to a new Labour Party with a stonking majority, I think they called it on the television the other night.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning to all our viewers and listeners, and of course, a new dawn. I was thinking about this the other day, and 5 years ago, it was completely the other way around. And then 5 years later, what a vision to see the landslide that Labour have made. But what's it going to be for the property? Well, that's what we're here for. That's what I'm sure Paul will be raising, and I will do my very best, as always, to keep the commentary running.
Indeed, and the calls on the new government to get on with it are already there. In fact, they were there beforehand. This article on July the 4th, before they actually closed the polls, the Open Property Data Association, the OPDA, is calling on the new Labour government to make a strong lead on urgently reforming the notoriously sluggish home buying process, which we've featured on this show many a time, so that the market can function efficiently. Focus, ownership and leadership, they say, from government should be at the highest level, such as the Treasury or the Cabinet Office. An alternative option could be for home buying to instead be owned and led by an independent body or figure such as the Housing Commissioner or a Housing Commissioner. This would have got home buyers and sellers' interests at heart, a mandate for driving change and accountability for getting reforms delivered. The association's chair, Maria Harris, points out that currently there's no single department or person in government with overall responsibility for the home buying journey, nor any holistic policy or strategic plan. Property data sits across multiple government departments, each with their own processes, roadmaps and approach to customer access to data. Since 2010, there have been 16 housing ministers, as we know. So there's an interesting couple of points in there, Joe, which is really what I wanted to raise and discuss today, and that is it right that housing is in with levelling up? I mean, it doesn't even have its own department. We used to have a housing minister, but now it's got something to do with levelling up as well. So it's not getting the full attention. And it'll be very interesting to see how it, over the next 5 years, that transforms, if at all.
Yes, a very interesting point, Paul, and a good subject to bring up. As far as I'm concerned, it is a real big shame that housing doesn't have a housing minister as it used to, and of course its own department. When you look around and look about, most things are reliant on the housing market, and yet it was sort of included into the levelling up with Michael Gove, which did not much for the levelling up at all. Should there be another department? Should it be separate? Yes, it should. It should have its own presidents. My worry always about these departments is that the more departments you have, the more rules and regulations that devise, and actually you could spend hundreds of millions of pounds as well as hundreds of millions of hours talking about something that never really actually finds a resolve. And sometimes it's not very difficult to find the resolve. The resolve is 9 times out of 10 staring somebody under their nose, but we can make it difficult. And half of the people that ever get involved in these ministerial positions actually have no skill, knowledge or experience of the housing market. So yeah, it would be very interesting to see what they can do or what they will do. But what I don't want to see is a title created for the sake of creating a title and actually not doing anything with it.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing that we haven't had an ombudsman for housing yet, somebody to sit in sort of judgment over certain situations. Because, I mean, you've got one you've got Ofwat for water, you've got Ofgem for the gas and electricity, you've got Ofcom for broadcasting. So all of these things that affect and touch everybody in the community, they've all got their own ombudsman who presumably sits independently, to some extent at least, from government ministers. And we've all known that over the years, whenever a government department gets involved in running something, such as the railways and various other things, they've never done a very good job because they're actually politicians. They're not necessarily people who know how to run railways or anything else for that matter. So just surprises me that we've not thought of something like that before. And, I suppose they got close to it when they were talking about having an individual court to deal with all the Section 22, Section 23 notices, etc. Beg your pardon. Is it 23? 24? Am I having a
21.
brain fart? 21, sorry,
21.
I'm having a brain fart, I'm sorry. Yeah, Section 21 notices. So they kind of get in there with the sort of court, the housing court, if you like, to sit in judgment. But it just amazes me that we haven't had a minister yet, or an
Well,
ombudsman yet.
I mean, well, there is an ombudsman, just so that we stand corrected in that. The TPO, the property, the property ombudsman does exist, and there is an existence, and we have all got to be members of the property ombudsman, as people that deal with property, be it letting, sales, or any other part of that. So there is an independent property ombudsman set up for the agency world. What we don't have. Is a directive minister or a minister in the government that actually supports the housing, which is a huge task and a huge area. Every government successive has always talked about building houses, dealing with social housing, dealing with problems for people that are homeless. It's all related around property in some, but we have had no one that has been given the task really to deal with it. My concerns are that the task given to somebody is someone who has no experience in it. So they may be a minister, they may manage to have got themselves elected, in their local constituency and then become a cabinet minister and so forth. But actually, they are not it's like asking someone to, I don't know, run British Airways, but they actually, run a toy shop down the road or something. It's just completely different to deal with things under the property side. So I think the TPO does exist. The property ombudsman does exist in terms of any regulations or any complaints or procedures that need to be dealt with from the agency side, from the property side. But what doesn't exist is a role or a recognition for the property market, the housing minister, as we said it was, within any government. And let's see what they bring up in going forward in the new Labour government.
Yeah, the property ombudsman's really there to protect the consumer from people like the agents and house builders and things like that. Really, isn't it? It's to regulate the industry as opposed to make a judgment on where houses should be built or anything of that nature. That's what I'm getting at, is that there needs to be somebody that can sit over it and say, well, look, let's look at the home buying process, because that's the other thing they say in this report here, that less than 1% of property data is currently available in an acceptable digital format. Much of that process is still reliant on paper, duplication, multiple signatures, and manual checks. Consequently, it's still taking 22 weeks for a customer to reach completion on their home purchase. The TPO doesn't really deal with that sort of thing. It protects people against the industry.
Yes, I was referring to on the basis that you were referring to a ombudsman as such. So I just wanted to clarify that that there is an ombudsman as such for the property side. But you're absolutely right. There is, I mean, the data does take far too long. The conveyancing system is archaic in its own right, and there are lots of areas within the housing market that don't have a specific or anyone particularly designated to deal with that. And we talk about planning and where they can build houses and so forth. One of the things that they have said is they want to fast track the planning application process for any developer that's looking to build, and perhaps maybe ease even some of the green belt in order to get the targets done. We'll see what happens in reality. They are words and they were conversations that were had and there were pledges that were made, but whether those pledges can actually happen will be the reality that we'll know over the next 5 years, I'm sure. But the reality is that there is no specific route. And if there have, we've had, as you rightly say, 14 ministers since 2010. is a lot of ministers who come and go out of that property section, whether it's levelling up or housing ministers as such. It's almost a revolving door. One comes, one goes, one comes, one goes, and actually no one stays because it's not seen as such an important position. At the same time, without the housing market, most of the other things wouldn't exist. So I think it does need some level of priority. My fear probably would be that they do a job for the sake of doing it, but actually not doing it properly. And by doing it not properly means that we end up having some system. And that's exactly what happens when the home buyers information pack was created, the HIPs at the time, and all sorts of things. Where thousands, hundreds of millions of pounds were spent on getting those things right, and they were just files created that never actually got further than the filing cabinet in the office each time. So it has to be thought through properly to make sure that it does do what it says on the tin, as opposed to saying what they think they'd like to say on the tin.
Well, the Open Property Data Association say that they want to see new legislation to enable the entire home buying and selling process to be digitised within 3 years. It's asking for the next government to publish the long-awaited future of home buying strategy, including the roadmap for public and local authority data to be digitised, and to set the expectations for industry adoption of open standards in interoperability, wow, and trust. Converting property data sources and documents to a digital format and mandating this that this data is available to consumers and the services that represent them at the start of the process with trust and shareability through open data standards would be the first vital step in digitising the process. This would significantly speed up things and create much needed transparency for everyone in the chain. And I suppose there's one thing to think about this. We've got tremendous change in the House with such a huge majority, so many of those that were standing for the Tory party no longer in the government. So there's going to be a lot of new faces in that building, many of whom will have the will to succeed because they're new and they have the enthusiasm. So you would hope that there'll be new enthusiasm to see the things that they see broken outside of a government building, to go in and try and make some difference. There's got to be some hope in that, and you never know, there might be somebody in that new intake of people, of which there's going to be quite a few. I'd say best part of 2/3 of that parliament will be new people or relatively new to the job, and there just might be some people who know something about housing. Perish the thought.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the old adage, isn't it? A new broom comes and sweeps clean. Let's see what this new broom does. I mean, they got a landslide victory, and they've got lots of new people, new faces, new jobs, and new abilities. Perhaps we don't know. But we might end up having the same, but with a different shade of red as opposed to blue, or maybe even orange, because nobody really knows where and who and what's going to happen. But I'm sure he's got a task in front of him, made lots of promises and pledges, and only time will tell. But in the meantime, we as people in the housing market, in the agency business, we've got always plenty to do just with our own thing. Now, when you look at digitizing and putting lots of data onto computers so that people can actually pick up data much quicker, I mean, that's a mammoth task on its own. I mean, to get land registry to be as data efficient as they are now has taken them the best part of the last 15, 20 years in order to get that to that level. So it's not a small task. It's not going to happen overnight. But yes, there could be some more things that could be digitized. Histories of a property, a bit like a service manual that you get, so that you know that each house has had certain things, or each property has certain things done, and they should have a stamped manual to say that that's been done. That should maybe be supplied by all builders, developers, and so forth that have come to the house. It's some sort of service history of a house that then helps people, especially ticking boxes. When you've got planning and you've got building regs and you've got, what materials will you, all that kind of stuff will will be helpful, but it is a lot to collate to try and put together. But it's not a bad idea. It's just how long will it take?
Well, the OPDA say that they've delivered its framework for property data standards, which has made free and shareable data tools available across the property industry. Those people that are using their digital standard for digital property packs have seen time reduced from offer accepted on a house and a mortgage to exchange of contracts within 15 days. So that's quite something, isn't it? I mean, from 22 weeks to 15 days, that's a transformation. And having, as you know, in my own personal circumstances, trying to change the deeds on a property, let alone sell it, to just change the deeds, I'm 8 to 10 weeks into that process already, and I'm not even selling the property.
Yeah, yeah, it's really really a difficult answer on this particular subject because so many people are involved in it and it takes forever and it's very frustrating. And sometimes we can't arrange a sale because those documents still not been registered at land registry, or they're not available, or someone's still got them in their drawer, or all of the above really. And as you rightly say, from your personal experience, you've seen how difficult it is. And if you were a minister today and you had that fantastic role of housing minister, what sort of things would you want to change? What would you say, having working with this program with me for us now a number of years and learning about the housing market and the frustrations that we deal with and listen to people and so forth. It's a mammoth task, Paul. I don't think it's someone that would take it on lightly, but they will give it to someone that probably doesn't really understand it. And one of the best experiences you can have is actually going through the process of buying your own home. It's almost like a training manual, but you'll be shocked to see how many people actually don't even take on board that rule at that time. They'll repeat it and do it time and time again because that's all they know. Is they don't know anything different. So there is room to do something like as OPD are calling for. But will it happen soon? The answer is probably no. Could it happen with the wrong people? That's highly likely, and we'll probably go through a number of them before we find the right person.
Well, if Keir is looking to appoint someone with experience, maybe Angela Rayner might be in the frame.
Well, she's got two houses, or she says she has got basically two houses, so she's got the experience, there's no doubt about it. And I think we'll find some amusing candidates that have been, appointed or about to be appointed or are going to come and go as time goes on. Yeah, it's something to watch now in terms of where it is. But we can only deal with what we have in hand. I've always been a believer that we can only deal with what's right under our nose, our ability, and within our control, and that is the current housing situation or the property sales, and how we advise and guide in that is very very important. And obviously, one thing I have learned as time has gone on, experience speaks volumes. And no matter how many times you go through what is now modern digital sales, people like Purple Brick and others have come, been disruptors, come along and actually ended up going away empty-handed. Well, not quite empty-handed. The directors have gone away very wealthy because they floated the stuff on the stock market and people bought into the idea. But fundamentally, people have gone away empty-handed because they just haven't been able to live up to their promises.
Let's take a look at some added value. Don't say that we don't give you something for free on this programme. Here we are with the property hotspots in the country. So if you're looking to invest or buy somewhere in the country, this is the hot list that you need. And the place that you need to buy, Joe, is Bradford. It's been named as the leading property hotspot for the country for the second consecutive quarter. This is according to On the Market. The property portal's hotspot index for the second quarter of the year is based on the proprietary algorithm that compares property leads and online property searches against available property stock to rank how active or hot a particular area's housing market is. Locations with high interest and low levels of stock top the index over markets that have higher numbers of available properties relative to interest. Based on the data, Blackpool edged into second place, who were fifth in quarter one, while Rochdale moved up to third place, 23rd in Q1. So here we are on the screen. We have Bradford at the top there, remaining at number one. Number two, up from number five, it's Blackpool, then Rochdale, Plymouth, Leicester, Stoke-on-Trent, Swindon, Sunderland, Wakefield, Derby, Middlesbrough, Burnley, Coventry, Huddersfield. This is a top 20, by the way. Wigan, Newcastle upon Tyne, Blackburn, Cambridge, and I wanted to get down to number 19, Slough, Joe.
There you go.
It's interesting. What do you think makes a property hotspot, though, in reality? I mean, what is it that makes somewhere more desirable to live than somewhere else? Because clearly these places are all in the north and not necessarily sort of greenbelt, leafy, big houses.
No, I think affordability is probably the number one reason for hotspots, especially when you look at the top 18 that you've just listed out are mostly in the north of England and mostly offer good value for money in housing, be it flats housing or whatever type of homes. So I think value is the first reason it becomes a hotspot. Excuse me. The second part, of course, is affordability. And of course, the most important part should be connectivity. And people working in London or down in the south want to know that they can actually get to work in a given time or have the freedom to work from home some days and work from their offices other times. But the number one reason that it is actually designed in that way is really about the value. I think when you think that you can find yourself a house in the northern part of the country, ranging anything from sometimes 50, 60, 70,000, even £20,000 in some of those areas. So that's why it becomes hotspot. And how people are traveling. So those are important reasons to how property goes. When you bring it down to places like Slough, for example, it's an amazing location for connectivity, far more than perhaps what is led to be the belief of Slough. When you think about the motorway links, both on the M4, you have three junctions that takes you off of the M4, two junctions off of the M40. It's now got the Elizabeth line into London. It's got the Great Western Rail, right the way across. It's got the A4. I mean, it's got a lot of things that makes things connect to that. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't have the appeal, the curb appeal that it should have. That's mostly because it's just not been looked after well. But other reasons are sound. And for the value for money, again, I go back to that point of value. You're getting a lot of property in and around the Slough area for people that coming out of London, West London. I mean, it almost forms part of West London, knowing that it's got Heathrow, which is the largest independent employer in the UK, let alone in the south of England, because Heathrow employs a hell of a lot of people just in that small area. So all of those things make it important. So jobs, value, connectivity are the reasons what make these properties the hotspot.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because just Plymouth, who are in fourth place, and Slough, who are in 19th place, they're the only ones that are from the south of the UK. And conversely, if we look at the bottom 20 on affordability, Brighton, right at the bottom of the pile, they are 54th now, but they were 51st in the chart, so continuing to languish in the lower half. Worthing's fallen down there. Southend-on-Sea, again, you're getting an idea of all these. Well, these are all coastal towns, aren't they? So definitely south. You've got Warrington, Norwich, Gloucester, Northampton, Aldershot, and Southampton. And Reading is in the middle there. They were 27th, they're now 35th. So I mean, Reading is generally considered to be very, very well connected. It's only just around the corner from Slough. It was interesting to see that. What is it then? I guess that makes these southern places so poor in terms of hotspot.
I think again, value. It becomes expensive for all of those areas that we talk about, and the social living and the life and so forth. So if you look at all the coastal ones you've discussed, they are retirement territory. It's what people want to do is ultimately go and live by the seaside. And so that becomes not as attractive, but only attractive to a niche market. And same as for places like Reading. I mean, Reading notoriously was not a particularly, nice place back in, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but it's got better through connectivity. And since the Elizabeth line has finally started working, it's become more accessible. And in terms of expense, it's now quite expensive, not just Reading itself as a town, but generally properties around Reading have become not as easily affordable. But there's good employment there, so employment both in places like Slough and Reading is very high. And people then tend to want to work there and maybe live a little bit on the outskirts of the main towns. And so, what makes it more attractive or less attractive in this case is perhaps because they're just that much more expensive to get to.
Interesting that certain places like Wigan, Liverpool, and Worthing have pretty much fallen off of the cliff in terms of their sexiness, if you want to call it that, to live. I wonder what it is that's unique about them.
Well, not personal experience on every one of those, but I would think that to a large extent, it's about the people and about the services that those places tend to offer. If you go to the coastal side, sometimes you go and seasonal. Don't forget these places are seasonal, so they have out of a year they might have 4 or 5 months of really good weather. Lots of people attracted to that. They go there just for visiting, but after that there is not much else that goes on. There's not much employment. There's not, and it's all seasonal employment. So those then become unattractive only for a short period. And then they're also not looked after. I've been to many a coastal period towns which are not looked after at all. And people don't look at them. Now they were port areas. Some places were port areas. You go to places like Grimsby, for argument to say, apart from its name actually spelling out where it is, I mean, it is sometimes more than grim and being in Grimsby, because it used to be a port, it used to be a fishing port, it was good for all of that industry has gone away from there. And even the carports and things that, shipping in cars, sometimes you see it's just full of cars that have been dropped in from the port. So, things like that don't make it attractive, and it makes it more of a like a ghetto place. And recently I've been around Wales, and I've found that, it's one of the largest places where a lot of the people are sent from asylum, for example. So, they look at all the hotels or the housing or multiple housing of multiple occupancy, who are all sent to places like Wales, Newport, and Cardiff, and so forth, because again, value for money. You're getting a lot of property for the amount of money. So people think, okay, well, I can afford to put a block of 20 flats up there and move everybody into those things. So there's a lot of those things, but we'll see what happens. In fact, I don't see that getting better, Paul. I think we're gonna get into a pretty big mess. I'd like to see what happens in the first 100, maximum 6 months of this landslide government, and I think you'll find that in that time it will become one of the same of what we already had, because this is not something that you can just sort out in a heartbeat. Immigration is still going to be at the top of the agenda. People are still going to come. In fact, they're going to get coming more, because the first thing you're going to do is get rid of the other policies from the other people. This is what happens. New government comes in, gets rid of what somebody else has done a hard work on doing, and then they think, okay, we got something new. So they end up spending money again to try and do something different. And it's not theirs, it's taxpayers' money. So that's what happens.
Looking at the London boroughs, we've got a pretty much a west and eastern split to some extent. Top of the list, you've got, well, actually, no, Barking and Dagenham's on the east, isn't it? You've got, but at the top there, you've got Havering, Sutton, Hillingdon, Enfield, Hounslow, Harrow, and Richmond and Ealing in there. But then on the other side, you've got at the bottom Lambeth, Southwark, Hammersmith. Mind you, Hammersmith's south, isn't it? So maybe not as west and east split as I thought. But what makes Barking and Dagenham better than Lambeth then? Come on, Joe.
Well, Lambeth being right in the heart of it all, and Dagenham a little bit on the outskirts, provides a slightly green, leafy territory that one doesn't have in Lambeth.
That's a fair answer, and you caught me out there, so I'm back now. There we are. I was just having a little cough. Anyway, that concludes it for this, not really election special, but it's the first under a new government for us. In fact, ever thinking about it on our show. It's the first one under a new colour of government. So we're all off to Bradford to buy our next house, Joe and I, and we'll see you all again very soon for another Property Matters.